Welcome to the BSA Housing Committee event for April. We're going to be talking to Ben here at the Mayor's Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. It's always a trick to remember everyone's new acronyms, sorry. And I think, yeah, for everyone, we'll just give it one more minute, Ben. For everyone who's joined already, we like to record these sessions so that we can have the content available for others through the website. And so if you would like to not be a part of the recording and just keep your camera off, we'll be able to hear your voice, but you won't show up on the screen. All right, 5 minutes. What do you think, David? 5 minutes enough, or do you want to give it another beat?
Let's give it another 2.
Okay. I haven't quite figured out the music on Zoom. I think that would be a good. We need like a BSA housing theme, entry theme music. And hope folks have been able to grab themselves some lunch. That's the other part of doing it virtual. We can't give you lunch. I don't know if that was 120 seconds, but it's been at least 2 minutes on my clock.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Lovely. So welcome everybody officially to the BSA Housing Committee event for April. We're here today with Ben Bryant of the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities to discuss with us the ins and outs of the Affordable Homes Act. Before we turn over to Ben, I just wanted to introduce myself, Sarah Kudra with Dream Collaborative and co-chair of Housing Committee. David.
Sorry, and I'm David Asher. I'm another co-chair of the Housing Committee and an architect at Davis Square Architects.
Lovely. And so Housing Committee is here to talk about all things multifamily. And we are, like to say that as a population is swelling and we're all facing a housing crisis, this really affects our vulnerable and underrepresented populations. And so our committee is looking really to empower architects as critical participants in the housing innovation by convening thought leadership about design and development and today policy. So we're really glad you all could be here. And then looking forward to June, we'll be doing another in-person networking event on June 25th. And then the May programming is kind of TBD, but look forward also to an event in May. So we'll follow up with that with the mailing list. So without further ado, Ben, please take it away.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you all for inviting me to join you today. My name's Ben Bryant. I'm Senior Policy Manager at the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, and I'm here to talk you all through the Affordable Homes Act that Governor Healey filed in October of last year. So just before I dive into the actual presentation, I'll set the stage with a bit of context before doing a deep dive into our capital authorizations, a couple new tax credits, and then 28 policy initiatives, which are really what set this bond bill apart from a traditional bond bill that is typically mostly capital authorizations. And then lastly, I'll touch on a couple of executive orders that the governor filed in October that are complementary to the Affordable Homes Act, 2 of which we have a couple updates on that may be of interest to this group. So to start off, some high-level statistics. Massachusetts housing supply has failed to keep up with demand. About 1.6% of housing units are available for sale or rent, which is an incredibly low vacancy rate. Overall, the Commonwealth estimates that there's a need of 200,000 new homes created by 2030. And housing costs all across the state are particularly acute for renters, for low-income households. Massachusetts's robust public housing stock, which is the highest per capita in the nation, is at risk due to deferred maintenance. And then home ownership is increasingly out of reach. You know, we've gone into communities all across the state where a number of households, you know, were prepared to put an offer in on their first home, only to find that the home sold for $50,000 above asking in a cash deal. And so we're really seeing struggles in all stakeholder segments when it comes to housing. And then lastly, just worth noting that the climate plan calls for a 35% reduction in residential building energy. So at the same time, we're facing a housing crisis. We're also well in the midst of a climate crisis in order to make sure that we're not canceling out the work we do in pursuit of those two goals or pursuit of addressing those two challenges. We need to make sure that we're well aligned. And so the governor filed in October the Affordable Homes Act, which is a comprehensive package of spending, policy, and programmatic actions. It would be the largest housing investment in Massachusetts history, and it truly prioritizes the most vulnerable households. Up to 80% of the funding in the bill will benefit low-income households, and up to 50% will benefit extremely low-income households. So at the 30% area median income threshold. Overall, the proposed investment in the bill is more than 2 times greater than the next largest housing bond bill filed in 2018 or signed into law in 2018. Filed or signed in 2018. The Affordable Homes Act, as I mentioned, includes a number of bold policy initiatives, a couple to call out here, but I will dive into depth on most of them. Are ADUs by right, local option transfer fee, processes for public land disposition of state-owned surplus land, and then some tenant protections such as an Office of Fair Housing, eviction record sealing, and some others. Taken all together, our office estimates that the Affordable Homes Act will fund or enable the creation of 40,000 new homes that wouldn't otherwise be built over the next 5 years. So this is on top of the natural market rate of production, which has been hovering between 10 and 15,000 housing units per year over the past decade or so. We're estimating that this 40,000 or 8,000 annually will be on top of that figure. 22,000 of those homes will be for low-income households with at least 4,000. This is maybe a bit of a lowball estimate, reserved for ELI households. And then about 12,000 new homes will be for middle-income households. In addition to the homes created, the Affordable Homes Act will also preserve, rehab, or improve an additional 27,000 units. And so really this is like, you know, units that might need certain repairs to become livable. An example would be, you know, public housing units that might have gone offline because they need repairs in order to be brought back online and made suitable for a resident. And so part of that preservation effort too will include decarbonizing about 3,000 public housing units and funding accessibility improvements for around 4,500 homes. The decarbonization of the public housing stock is in addition to some efforts underway by the Climate Bank, the newly established Climate Bank in Massachusetts, which will be focused more on decarbonizing market rate or naturally occurring affordable housing rather than our state-owned public housing. So as I mentioned earlier, there are three major components of the Affordable Homes Act. There are the $4.12 billion in capital authorizations. There are a couple new tax credit programs, and then there are 28 legislative or policy initiatives. So starting with the capital authorizations, some highlights worth calling out. The $1.6 billion for public housing is something we're all very excited about here. It would include about $1.3 billion for capital improvements, $150 million for decarbonization, $100 million for redevelopment, and then some $15 million for accessibility upgrades. There's also $275 million for the Sustainable and Green Housing Initiatives and Innovative Housing Proposals Fund. And so think innovative strategies like office conversions, or this line item includes funding for a social housing pilot program similar to what certain communities across the nation have been doing, maybe most notably in Montgomery County, Maryland. There is also some funding included to further home ownership opportunities, $100 million for Commonwealth Builder. There's also $50 million included for Mass Dreams. And then there is $50 million to support a new momentum fund, which would be a permanent revolving fund that would attract private investment. Think pension funds that have money to invest in housing development. It would then return a payment over the next 5 to 10 years, and the interest that wouldn't be paid out to the investor would then get reinvested into this fund, with the idea being it would be a permanent way for us to fund workforce or middle income housing development. So that's really the aim of this fund. And then, as I mentioned a bit earlier, the Affordable Homes Act really does call on HLC to direct all of our investments to prioritize the state's climate and decarbonization goals. Housing and the climate are perhaps Governor Healey's top two priorities. And it's really important, if we're going to make headway on either topic, that we make headway on both at the same time, through some collaboration with our partners at the Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So I won't go into too much detail here because there's a double click on the next page, but I'll pause for a minute so you can kind of see the difference between the 2018 bond bill and our proposal in the Affordable Homes Act. Across all these different categories of authorizations, there is a substantial increase. And so going to the next slide, you can kind of see in a bit more detail how this is broken down. I'll call out a couple some of the main authorizations I haven't mentioned yet. But the Housing Stabilization and Investment Fund, we're proposing that it be funded at $425 million. It would consolidate a couple of existing funds, and it supports new construction, but also preservation and rehab. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which was funded at $400 million in 2018, will now be funded at $800 million. It provides resources to create or preserve affordable housing, probably the most reliable capital tool we have in our toolkit for investing in and creating affordable housing. And included in that $800 million, as I mentioned, is a $50 million earmark for the Mass Dreams program, which provides down payment assistance in certain communities across the state. There's also the Housing Works infrastructure program worth calling out. I glossed over it before, but this would be a new program that would fund municipal infrastructure projects to encourage denser housing development. These projects would be something like connecting a sewer line to a new development so that the development could be supported, or building a sidewalk to make a development walkable. And this pot of funding is really for situations in which, you might have the ideal plot of land in the plans for a development, but there's no way to get the quarter mile from the development to the nearest train station, and it could be solved simply with some infrastructure funding that now exists, and so we think it will be a helpful unlock. Moving on to some additional authorizations, the Housing Innovations Fund here is really worth shouting out. It supports innovative and alternative forms of rental housing, transitional and permanent housing for households experiencing homelessness, housing for seniors and veterans, and then also some transitional units for people recovering from substance abuse issues. And then an additional one I'll call out here as well is the Massachusetts Rehab Home Modification Loan Program, which provides funding to modify homes of individuals or families with disabilities or seniors so that they can remain in their communities. I already mentioned public housing, but this slide, you can really see the difference in the state's investment in 2018 versus the proposed investment now. But I'll make sure that I share these slides with Sarah and David after this call so that they can be sent out with you. There's a lot of good stuff in here worth taking a look at, and I'm happy to revisit anything in a Q&A after the presentation, but I want to make sure that we keep on moving along because there's a lot of good stuff in the bill. So looking at some of the tax credits, when we were initially filing the bill, there was a little bit of uncertainty as to whether the governor's tax bill was going to pass. That did pass shortly before, and so we were planning on proposing increases to the state low-income housing tax credit and the housing development incentive program. Because those were included in the tax relief bill, we didn't include those, but it's worth calling out those two tax credits that were expanded in the governor's tax relief package, because they are both an important part of the capital stack when it comes to financing housing developments. Two new tax credits that we did propose in the Affordable Homes Act, one new tax credit. The Community Investment Tax Credit Program is a program that supports the work of CDCs across the state. It's existed for a few years, but the governor is proposing to make the credit permanent and increase it from 12 million to 15 million a year. And then the home ownership tax credit would be a new tax credit that authorizes Mass Housing to award up to 10 million in credits to produce homes affordable to first-time home buyers. So whereas we have Mass Dreams as a way of providing down payment assistance to prospective first-time home buyers, this tax credit, coupled with the Commonwealth Builder Program, incentivizes developers to actually build the homes that Massachusetts residents can live in. And so moving along to the policy recommendations, this deck does not touch on every single policy included in the bill. I would encourage you all to, and I'll also share this with Sarah and David, but I'd encourage you to look at a brief fact sheet that we've prepared on the bill that does include an item by item summary of every authorization and every policy initiative. But these are some of the high level, less technical initiatives included. The notable ones include accessory dwelling units as of right, which would allow ADUs not bigger than 900 square feet to be built by right in all municipalities and single-family zoning districts. Before, the upper bound limit for ADUs has been 600 feet. And so if you think about it, the extra 300 feet really allows for an additional bedroom. It allows for potentially a small family to occupy the unit. And so it would do a lot of good. And then the as of right, HLC estimates to have the potential of creating 8 to 10,000 new ADUs across the state in the next 5 years. It's worth noting here that California and you know, in putting together this bill, we looked at what a lot of states were doing, what they've had success with, what a lot of states in New England were doing, many of which, including New Hampshire, have ADUs as of right. We were also, you know, in one case looking at California that had ADUs, had an ADU law. It was not as of right. They amended it to be as of right in 2017. And it almost instantly led to a boon in housing production. It lowered costs. It was really seen as a success across the state. I mentioned it earlier, but it's worth saying a bit more now. We're also including an initiative for surplus public land disposition, which would create a path to streamline the disposition of land controlled by state agencies that is identified as surplus. Currently, my office has been meeting with a few other offices across the state to put together guidelines for the disposition of surplus land, with the idea being that there are a number of state agencies that might have a suitable parcel with no actual plans for the development of that land. That land could then be used as a bit of a bargaining chip with a municipality, with developers to incentivize all types of development, but with particular focus on affordable development. There are a couple of commissions that the governor is proposing to create: a commission on making Massachusetts an age-friendly state, and a commission on extremely low-income housing. There's also, I'll call it out here, a seasonal communities designation, which would create a similar commission to look at the challenges certain seasonal communities in Massachusetts face. So think like the Cape and Islands and the Berkshires that might have a high population of short-term renters. There's a local option real estate transfer fee, which has been a pretty contentious policy proposal so far. But it would allow municipalities the option to adopt a transfer fee of 0.5 to 2% on the portion of a sale over $1 million or the county median home sales price. So if you were to sell a home for 1.2 million and your community had a 2% transfer fee, that 2% fee would only be applied to the 200,000, not the sum total of the sale. And you know, I mentioned it, but it's worth mentioning again. This is an opt-in. There are a number of communities across the state who have been advocating for this policy for a long time. By structuring this as an opt-in, we're aiming to give those communities what they want, while also not treating every community across the state with a broad brush. And then a couple of points to call out on tenant protections and fair housing. We're proposing creating an Office of Fair Housing to really focus on enforcement initiatives and education and outreach across the state, making sure residents are aware of their rights, making sure landlords are aware of their responsibilities. We're proposing eviction record sealing in certain cases. I won't read all of that lengthy text on the right-hand side, but for varying circumstances, there our different processes for now going about sealing your eviction record. And then we're also proposing a supportive housing pool fund, which would create a flexible supportive housing pool program that would then be funded via some flexible capital authorization funding. And so this is just the mechanism. It would be to create the fund. We would then need to fund it, but we do have plans to do so. One note here that is definitely worth mentioning. I'm sure you all are aware of the emergency assistance crisis that the state has been facing, and the migrant homeless crisis. Supportive housing is really the long-term solution to the crisis, rather than temporary shelter. And so the notion is, as we try to maximize our shelter capacity, we also want to be forward thinking about looking to develop more supportive housing, to make sure that we are opening the exit door as wide as possible, while also limiting how many people actually need to rely on the emergency assistance system. And lastly, I'll touch on a few of the complementary executive orders Governor Healey filed in October. I've already spoken a bit about surplus public land, so I won't say much more on that. But the Housing Advisory Council and the State Housing Plan, it is definitely worth touching on. Essentially, Governor Healey created a Housing Advisory Council to oversee the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities in our development of a 5-year strategic statewide housing plan. The precipice behind this action is that we're in a housing crisis right now. The only way that we'll truly be able to pull ourselves out of this crisis is if we're a bit more forward thinking, and plan a bit more strategically. And so currently, our office is going on a series of tours across the Commonwealth where we're hearing directly from advocates, from constituents, from all types of stakeholders. We kicked off our listening session tour in Lynn a couple of weeks ago. We were in Springfield yesterday, and we're planning on holding at least 12 more sessions across the state. So I'll make sure to share that information with Sarah and David as well. But this is a really great opportunity if you're interested in providing your perspective on what the state should be prioritizing within the plan. The goal, these sessions are all 2 hours long, with the first 20 to 30 minutes being welcoming remarks from the secretary, and then a brief presentation that kind of sets the context of why we're even doing this effort. But really the brunt of these sessions is on breakout group discussions with the stakeholders that show up. And so those have all been very productive conversations so far. And yeah, I would welcome any and all participation at some of the upcoming ones. And then in a similar vein, the governor also created a commission on unlocking housing production. The goal of this commission is to identify barriers to housing production and recommend policies that could be pursued to improve the development environment and spur production broadly. The group's paying particular attention to land use and zoning reform. I breezed through the policy initiatives a bit, but with the exception of ADUs as of right, we really didn't have a lot of zoning policies or zoning reform policies included in the Affordable Homes Act, in large part because our office was created June 1st of last year. We filed the bill shortly after 100 days in office, and we really wanted to make sure that we hit the ground running with the intention of revisiting a lot of the challenges many of you folks might face in your daily lives with some regulatory issues or with building and fire code challenges. So I will also share some information on the Unlocking Housing Production Commission, but I just want to call out that there will be an opportunity for stakeholders on both the statewide housing plan and the Unlocking Housing Production Commission to submit feedback. If there are any particular policies that you would like the group to explore or look into further, if there's, a topic that you think that you have some expertise on and would just like to offer your availability to the group, we would definitely welcome any and all forms of engagement. The goal of this group is to create a report of recommendations for the governor by the end of this year, with the idea being at the start of the next legislative session, the governor could be following up on the momentum that we hopefully gain from passing the Affordable Homes Act with some comprehensive zoning and land use reform that would make it easier, make it cheaper, make it faster to build housing, which we all see as good things. But yeah, that wraps up the presentation on the Affordable Homes Act. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have or provide an email if I need to follow up and do some research. But just to reiterate, I'll make sure to share all of the information I referenced with Sarah and David so they can share it out with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And as folks are thinking of questions, you can either put those in the chat or you can raise a hand and reminder you'd be on recording, but happy to have you. Yes, Ben, I think it'd be great to circulate both your contact information and a couple of the points of contact, the listening sessions and the Unlocking Housing Production Commission. I think my main takeaway is that the state, the governor, are doing a lot of intentional outreach. And I would dare say it's an unprecedented amount of feedback that the government is looking for to really learn from practitioners about how to move forward. And I'm grateful for that. And I would like to just help disseminate the opportunity to our constituents, let's call it, and have architects actually participate in that. All right. Do you have some?
I have some initial questions while we wait for our members to share their own. Ben, I was hoping you could share the current status of the bill.
Yeah, absolutely. So the bill is moving to House Ways and Means. It started at the Joint Committee on Housing, progressed to the Joint Committee on Bonding, and then last week it was moved on to House Ways and Means. We expect that they'll be taking it up shortly after budget debate.
Okay.
So it will likely be moving on from House Ways and Means in early June.
So what would be the anticipated timeline if everything goes according to plan for these changes to take effect? Yeah,
so the anticipated timeline for the bill is still looking like if everything goes to plan, it would most likely pass in late July. That being said, our team has begun to hold meetings over the past few weeks to discuss what the implementation around these policies would actually look like to ensure that in cases where we need to put out regulations or guidelines, we're being proactively patch happening because we're already prepared to put out guidelines. I can't say much more to that other than it really depends on the policy because there's still some things that may take 6 to 12 months after the bill passes in order for us to clearly define. That being said, it's the secretary's intention that we move quickly on this the second the bill is signed. There isn't going to be a October or an August lull that the legislators might enjoy.
Mhm. And we don't specifically advocate for any specific bill, but if our members wanted to advocate, they can reach out to their representatives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, a couple other background questions on things that the bill touches on. You mentioned the local option transfer fees. Currently, what is the system for that and the roadblocks, and how would this bill change that?
Yeah, so currently, if a municipality wants to create a local option transfer fee, they would have to file a home rule petition with the legislature, which is a fairly lengthy process and oftentimes is deprioritized compared to other pieces of business on the legislature's plate. And so what we seen at this point is 11 or 12 communities have filed those home rule petitions, yet are unable to make headway on those. Part of the reason for that is that the legislature wants to see where the Affordable Homes Act goes first. But we've seen a lot, particularly from the Cape and the Islands, where certain communities have used up all available funding for affordable housing in many cases, and are looking for new avenues, new tools that they can rely on to create development, and are unable to do so. They're met with the answer that, or they're met with the opposition that the local option transfer fee wouldn't work, in every community across the state, and that's not what they're asking for. They want it in their community where everyone wants it, as opposed to in certain contentious communities where it might not be wanted. But currently the process is a one-off process and at the mercy of the legislature.
Well, it's actually a great segue to the question in the chat from Vicky. I don't know if you'd like to come off mute, Vicky, but I can proceed in reading.
Sure, yeah. My question really was on the ADUs and really any other portions of this and how it plays with towns and what they can add on to, like requirements or not non-requirements. Like how strong is this as the language, and how kind of like what we're seeing with MBTA communities bill, where people are putting on onerous requirements within their town to make it almost impossible, even though they meet the letter of the law.
Yeah. So on ADUs, the by right provision, I'd say is very strong. Cities and towns would be able to offer more flexibility, but they wouldn't be able to offer less flexibility. And so even if an ADU law exists in a city or town now, if this act passes, then the version included in the Affordable Homes Act would become a de facto law across the state. If a city or town were to say, we want to upgrade the maximum square footage to 1,000 square feet, they would be able to do so, but they wouldn't be able to say add parking requirements that that would make the development unfeasible, or they wouldn't be able. The exception here, rather, I'd say, is ADUs do still need to be in compliance with sewer and septic regulations. And so there may be certain scenarios in which a town attempts to modify those regs to avoid or to make it more difficult to build ADUs. The last thing I'll say on this point, and happy to answer any follow-ups, in the California example I mentioned before, and what we've seen in Rhode Island as well, when there's a home ownership requirement or a parking requirement for the ADUs, they have a lot less bite. And they don't also always necessarily function the way we would intend them to be an affordable, dignified unit home that people can live in. And so by removing some of the barriers in terms of who has to own the property, and by expanding some of the square footage, our intention is that we could create an environment where ADUs in Massachusetts are a more common option, but they're also a more selected option for housing an adult child who might have a disability, or an aging parent who wants to stay in their community. And so there are various ways that the program might function. In Rhode Island, notably, a lot of seniors have been renting out units to recent college graduates who are looking to stay in their communities, and who might help out by buying or picking up groceries or prescriptions, and able to ease the seniors' ability to age in place while also having their own opportunity for housing.
Thank you. No, I was thinking of putting one in my backyard for my dad to come and move in, so he'd have his own space. I think it's a really terrific way to allow some diversity and flexibility. But I did hear of a town recently that did just increase their sewer and septic requirement, their Title V requirement, because of the MBTA Communities Act, and trying to use that as the lever to stop development. So yeah, just.
And I'll put my email in the chat, Vicky, but would love if you could share any information you might have around that town, or if it was a while ago, or just
okay.
off. No worries if not, but
Okay.
the thing I'll add there is the Unlocking Housing Production Commission is looking at how certain communities will beef up Title V regs in order to avoid development. And so it is something we're looking at.
Thank you.
And I actually have a follow-up to the ADU question. Where they'll be allowed as of right, what happens when the ADU conflicts with the local municipality's dimensional requirements? Let's say maximum FAR, side yards, maximum height, etc. Do these as of right ADUs have to comply with local dimensional requirements as well?
I have to get back to you on that one, David. I believe so, but I don't want to lock into any answer without double checking.
Okay. If our members wanted to find more specifics on that, the best place to look would be the language of the bill.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'll try to get you an answer though, because what I will say, the bill language might reference a certain chapter, but not clearly spell out an exact answer. So.
Okay. And while we wait for more questions in the chat, we can move on to another one that I've noted. In terms of surplus land disposition, what are the current roadblocks to that? Is this just a general encouragement of municipalities to identify and dispose of their surplus land, or is it solving a specific problem that is impeding that process?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a mix of both. So we're thinking about it from a incentivizing or mandating state agencies perspective and an incentivizing municipalities perspective. So for state agencies, it would be a mandate coupled with technical assistance, most likely. We're currently mapping out surplus state land or state-owned land across the state. And we're creating guidelines to instruct state agencies for how they can actually dispose of that land and how they're supposed to dispose of that land. For municipalities, we're at the earlier stages of developing actual guidelines, but the notion that is being bounced around right now and that will probably stick is one that whereas state agencies can be mandated, municipalities need to be incentivized. And so we're exploring models where perhaps the land is the incentive for, in the case where the state owns the land in insert municipality, and the state agency disposes of that land to the municipality to then put out an RFR for a developer. And so we're exploring ways in which, the state giving that land to the municipality could be the incentive for the actual development. Will there be additional funding needed to make a development pencil out? But again, that's at the early stages.
Okay. And lastly on my list, the Office of Fair Housing. That is an exciting prospect. How are fair housing issues currently dealt with in terms of enforcement? And how will the establishment of this office change that?
Yeah, I'd say right now the handling of fair housing disputes are pretty siloed, and also there can sometimes be a breakdown in communication between our legal team and the AGO's office or whoever may be involved in a particular case. So the notion of this fair housing office is really to add a point person and then ultimately a staff around that person whose role is to kind of facilitate the conversations between all the required stakeholders that need to be a part of the conversation. So our legal team, the AGO's office, potentially certain public housing authorities across the state. The idea is by bringing some structure to this important topic, we can help address challenges in a cohesive manner rather than having this be the fifth to do on the list for a certain staff member to inquire about a certain case or to email a landlord to make sure that they're in compliance. So it's really meant to provide the structure, and then the idea is that the office would grow over the coming years as its capabilities were more sharply defined beyond protecting tenants' rights.
Thank you. That's great to hear. I'm going to open it back up to the group and to Sarah.
Yeah,
Any additional questions?
Wandy, please.
Hi all. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, amazing. Ben, thank you so much for the presentation. This has been super enlightening and we are so excited about what is to come. I think my question is actually really focused on this, what you mentioned specifically around the housing, sort of the production side of it, but more so for homeownership. And so ways to incentivize not just folks who are hoping to purchase their first homes, but the developers who are actually going to be putting those together. And so I'm curious, we've been looking into starter homes and previous bills that had been passed at a state level that were really meant to incentivize folks to build starter homes. And so just wondering if there's an overlap with any of those previous bills, or generally, if you could expand a little bit more on that.
Yeah. So yeah, Commonwealth Builder is a tried and true program that has been pretty successful for creating new starter home opportunities. Most of the authorizations included in the bill were included in the 2018 bond bill. And so in a lot of cases, we're expanding those authorizations, stuff like the Affordable Housing, Trust Fund, which may not tackle homeownership specifically, but it is being expanded. Mass Streams is being expanded with the notion that the greater funding will create more of those opportunities. At the same time, we are continuing to explore within the office, but also with some stakeholders across the Commonwealth, pathways for home ownership development. Mass Housing and the Mass Housing Investment Corporation recently launched the Equitable Developers Fund, which is geared towards, and I see you're nodding, but it's geared towards backing minority developers and allowing them to get a foothold in the industry. So we're trying to be thoughtful about making sure that there is a diversity among the folks who are actually building the homes, as well as the folks who are the recipients of those homes. But really, the expanded funding has been the key.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for all the questions. All right, last call. I think this has been a great conversation. I know folks, some folks can really geek out about policy, which is awesome, and we need more architects who are really understanding the ins and outs of this to try to participate and to make sure it gets adopted and moved forward appropriately. So thank you, Ben, for taking your time today to discuss with this group of folks. And
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and as we said, we'll make the recording available online eventually, and Ben's going to share a few resources we will try to disseminate. For folks who are not yet joined, we have a LinkedIn group, and I think that will become sort of the main method for distributing material after the event, because BSA is in charge of folks' emails, so I can't email you all. So join our LinkedIn group, it's in the chat, or just search BSA Housing Committee and we will get you in the group. So thank you all, and we hope to see you again soon. Okay.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks.